Assalamu alaikum everyone, how are you guys doing? So if any of you have been on the internet recently or on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, you are bound to have seen a video talking about AI. Whether that be about the new ChatGPT 5 or about how AI is taking everyone's job basically, what jobs are still going to be beneficial once AI starts growing and advancing, and how some companies have already replaced human beings with AI, such as Microsoft laying off thousands of workers to simply replace them with AI. Now, with the increase of AI, and especially its popularity, people have been using AI for a variety of reasons. To write their essays in college, to peer review something, or whatever the case may be, or to look up their symptoms if they're sick. However, something that I have found very problematic, that I have seen a lot of Muslims with very little knowledge about Islam been doing, is that they use AI for their fiqh or aqidah rulings. For instance, somebody might not know whether X is haram or halal. So instead of asking their local imam, looking up what the scholars say, going on at least Islam Q&A, they go to ChatGPT and get the answer. And this kind of leads into a question that I have not seen addressed by many in the English-speaking world. That is, can AI replace Islamic scholars? And in this video, I will be discussing why AI can never replace Islamic scholars. This video idea was brought up actually from a video that my dad sent from Sheikh Suleiman El-Ruhaili. More on that clip a bit later. But essentially in this video, I will be arguing that AI can never replace Islamic scholars. And in order to do this video will be divided into 3 sections. The first section is describing the main fundamental difference between AI and humans. The second section is focusing on the roles that Islamic scholars have. While there are many roles, we will be mainly focusing on 3. Then, once we understand the main fundamental difference between humans and AI, the roles of scholars, we can then go to the third and final section, looking at why AI can never, with that fundamental difference that we discussed in the first section, replace those roles that was laid out in the second section of this video. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and let's begin. So for starters, prior to even looking at why AI cannot replace Islamic scholars, we need to understand the main fundamental difference between AI and humans. In order to understand this, we have to understand what AI is. And now, many people actually kind of understand what AI is, but they don't know how to put it into words. AI is a tool. It's a program that you can ask it for commands. For instance, you can ask ChatGPT or any of these AI programs to, let's say, write you a 500-word essay on George Orwell's 1984. And it will produce that. Now, the way it produced that is not by its own self, its own fruition. The way it actually produces that, you tell it a command, it will read the command and extrapolate the information, the way it should be written, and all that from outside sources. So, if you tell it to analyze a section 1984, for instance, it will either grab it from the book, it will either look at it from other places on the internet, other summaries, other analysis from the internet, and produce something by itself in that essence. So think of it like this. If you tell your computer, for instance, or you go on your computer and you search something up that is on your computer will look up what is within the computer to find that thing you're looking for. Let's say you're trying to find a file that you recently placed in your computer. If you search it in your computer will do a search within what is found within the computer itself and produce that thing, give you that thing. AI, on the other hand, is a more somewhat advanced system in which not only does it look up things that it doesn't have stored within, because it can look up anything on the internet, but it can also produce something kind of mimicking human intelligence. And that's the main thing with AI. It mimics human intelligence. However, it does not have human intelligence. And there's a very big difference between AI and humans. Even though you can tell AI to write you a 500-word essay on George Orwell, and you tell a human being to write you a 500-word essay on George Orwell, and while they might produce the same thing, there is a difference there. The process, there's something fundamentally different between AI and humans. And in order to understand this better, let us look at this famous Chinese thought room experiment. In this Chinese room thought experiment, imagine somebody is placed in a room, in a enclosed room. He doesn't know anything about the Chinese language. He doesn't know how it looks. He doesn't know how to speak it, how to read it, nothing. However, the people who put him in that room give him a manual right next to him, let's say a video manual or a book manual. And this manual can help him mimic the Chinese language. So let's say somebody from outside the room comes in and writes him a letter or asks him a question in Chinese. And while this individual inside the room does not know Chinese, due to him having the instruction book or the instruction video on how to mimic the Chinese language, he is able to look at the book and the manual and mimic the Chinese language. He's able to use the symbols that is given to him within the book and within the room to mimic the Chinese language. So he can actually respond to those individuals sending him those letters. Now, on the outside, when he responds, people from the outside assume that he actually knows Chinese because you send him a letter in Chinese and he responds in Chinese, therefore he must know Chinese. However, in reality, he doesn't know Chinese. He is simply mimicking the Chinese language through the use of symbols. So he is using symbols to mimic the Chinese language without actually knowing the Chinese language or what the words that he's writing actually means. He only knows how to mimic it. And John Searle, the one who created this Chinese thought room experiment, he was essentially arguing about computers, the difference between computers and humans. And for him, this Chinese room thought experiment is essentially showing the difference between syntax and semantics. Now, syntax is kind of a cold approach to looking at language. Basically, syntax is just looking at the language itself without any deeper understanding of the words. So for instance, the boy ran to the store. Syntax is looking at the sentence itself and whether it complies with all the grammar rules and the sentence is worded properly in order to make a sentence. You'll see there's the boy, which is the subject, ran, which is the verb, and so on and so forth. It only looks at it at kind of face value through the grammatical cold structure of the English language or any other language. Semantics, on the other hand, is actually looking at the deeper meaning of the sentence itself, of the words. What does the boy ran to the store actually mean? What does it mean in relation to, let's say, the story that is being produced by the author? That is semantics, understanding the deeper meaning within the words and the sentences and the paragraphs, while syntax is just looking at the cold approach. So John Searle, in his Chinese thought room experiment, says that computers work in the way of syntax, while humans work in syntax and semantics. Computers can only see things through this cold approach of just the rules, the symbols, how it looks, so on and so forth, while humans can do that, but they also can look and actually understand what is being done. So, looking at the Chinese thought room experiment, this individual in the room is only doing syntax, looking at the symbols of the Chinese language, while the person outside the room is looking at the semantics, actually understanding the deeper meaning of what is being said, for instance. And John Searle is saying that's the difference between computers and humans. Computers only look at symbols in that cold approach. And that's really the difference between AI and humans. AI can write you a great 500-word essay in 1984. It can write you a great CV. It can write you a great, introduction to your essay. But it doesn't actually understand or feel the thing that it is discussing. You might have watched a movie and felt super emotional while watching that movie, and you're going to write a review about it. However, if you tell AI to write the exact same review of that film, and you tell it to write an emotional review, like an emotional piece of review, AI can do that, but it doesn't actually feel. It doesn't actually feel the emotions similar to you or that human who actually felt the emotions while watching that film. And that is a big difference, that AI cannot feel, but humans can. AI can only understand everything through these symbols, through the grammar, but it doesn't actually understand the deeper meaning of what is being said. It's only looking at it through symbols. Now, how is it possible that AI cannot do this, yet we humans can? And this is the main fundamental difference between AI and humans, that being consciousness. Consciousness is our window to reality, as stated by Joshua Rasmussen. Consciousness is the most known thing in the universe, yet the most unknown thing in the universe at the same time. You watching this video right now, and you, however emotions you have, you are experiencing your consciousness. Like right now while watching this video. Me talking, I'm experiencing my consciousness. Your computer watching this video, or you telling AI to summarize this video, it does not have consciousness. It does not have that aspect that we humans have. Consciousness is so well known, yet it's so complicated and unknown at the same time. How is it possible, for instance, that we humans are made up of blood, cells, made up of bones, flesh, all these nonsense parts, yet we're able to feel, we're able to express our emotions. We can understand emotions. How is that possible? Many times people use consciousness in a way to argue about the existence of God, for instance. While that's an interesting topic and there should be a video done on it, inshallah, later, for the purposes of this video, we need to understand that consciousness, as stated by Joshua Rasmussen, is our window to reality. We can understand reality through consciousness. Therefore, without consciousness, we don't really understand reality. We only understand reality without consciousness through symbols. The same way in the Chinese thought room experiment, that individual inside the Chinese thought room experiment was able to communicate in Chinese. He only understood it through the symbols, without actually understanding the Chinese language. But we humans, having consciousness, which is the window to reality, we are able to actually understand what is going on, to understand emotions, to understand that when we're typing up that review for that emotional film or the essay for 1984, we actually feel the emotions when writing it, or we actually feel the emotions when reading that book. Unlike ChatGPT, DeepSeek, and all these other AI platforms. So once again, to really summarize this, AI is a tool, is a program that can mimic human intelligence through the use of symbols. AI cannot and does not produce things in the same way that we humans do through our intelligence. The main reason being that AI lacks consciousness, lacks that window to reality, that ability to actually understand, to actually feel, to actually have emotions, to actually understand the words being said in a book. So the main fundamental difference between AI and humans is its ability to understand emotions, is its ability to understand things through the use of consciousness. Essentially, the main difference, the fundamental difference, is consciousness. Now that we understand this, let us look into the roles of Islamic scholars. Now, there are many roles of Islamic scholars, and we don't have the time and luxury to look at all the roles. However, in order to really argue and make my case that AI can never replace Islamic scholars, we need to look at a couple of them. Specifically, we'll be looking at the three primary roles of Islamic scholars. Those three roles being ijtihad, protecting orthodoxy, and using wisdom when producing judgment. Let's look at all three of these. The first role is ijtihad. Now, ijtihad is when a scholar of Islam who has mastered, not just mastered, but memorized and understood nearly all the sciences of Islam. They understood tafsir, they understood hadith, they have memorized numerous books of hadith, they have memorized numerous books of fiqh. And once they have reached that level, being an Islamic scholar, they have the ability then to do ijtihad, to extract a new ruling on something when there is no explicit text from the Quran and Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So for instance, a classic example of this is, let's say, smoking. There's no Quranic ayah or hadith from Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam talking about smoking, whether it's allowed or not allowed. However, scholars, Muslim scholars around the world who have mastered all the fields of sciences in Islamic science, what they do is they look at smoking. What smoking is. What does smoking do to the body? How do people feel when they smoke? What are the benefits or what are the non-benefits of smoking? And once they understand smoking entirely, they then go back to the Quran, Sunnah, Qiyas, analogy, the maqasid of the Sharia, maslaha, mafsada, all these aspects of usul al-fiqh, from the tafsir, from hadith literature, and so on, to create a ruling whether or not smoking is haram or halal based on those principles. This ijtihad is not simply looking at the Quran and Sunnah. There's far more into it, understanding what smoking is, understanding proper qiyas, understanding the maqasid of Sharia, really understanding what would happen, let's say, if they allowed smoking to be halal. What's the mafsada, what's the maslaha, the benefits or the harms for that to occur. As many of you know, smoking is basically unanimously haram. Nobody really allows for smoking in the Islamic world nowadays because they looked at the Quran and Sunnah and all the other texts in Islamic history and the rules of usul al-fiqh and understanding what smoking is to create that new ruling. The second role of Islamic scholars is protecting orthodoxy. Scholars act as guardians of faith. They protect the faith, but they don't protect the faith simply by memorizing the entire Quran and all the hadiths, which they do. I'm not saying they don't do that. They actually do that as well. But that's not the only thing they do when it comes to protecting orthodoxy. They do that as well, but protecting orthodoxy is actually understanding the Quran and Sunnah, actually understanding who the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was, who the Sahaba were, what is the inner meaning of the Quran and Sunnah, and understanding subtle differences that some groups make when it comes to Aqidah, our theology. Look at, for example, Imam Ghazali and Ibn Taymiyyah against the philosophers. Both of these scholars, not only did they memorize the Quran, Sunnah, and all that stuff, they did that as well, but they understood tiny changes, tiny differences that those philosophers at that time, the Islamic philosophers at the time, did and changed when it came to Islamic theology, Islamic Aqidah. Now for them, these Islamic scholars like Imam Ghazali, Ibn Taymiyyah, they had a bias. They had a bias to protect the religion. And Islamic scholars have that good bias. They protect the faith. AI, which we'll deal more in the third section of this video, AI has a bias, but it's not exactly the same bias as, I say, Imam Ghazali, Ibn Taymiyyah, and the scholars of the past who were protecting the faith. Protecting the faith is of utmost importance to the Islamic scholars. And the last role of Islamic scholars for this video is using wisdom. Now, wisdom in the Arabic language and within Muslim scholarship is wada' shay fi makani sahih, is to put something in its proper place. Meaning that sometimes you could have the right answer, or you see somebody doing something wrong and the right thing to do is to tell them not to do it. However, there are instances where not telling somebody they're doing something wrong, or instances where even though you have the right answer, it's better not to speak, is the more wise thing, and it's the greater thing to do. It is wise sometimes to withhold information, not to tell somebody they're doing something haram, to make it easy for people. An example of this is in the seerah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. After so many years of fighting the Quraysh, of being banished from Mecca, having to be being persecuted, having to flee Mecca to go to Medina, after so many years, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahabas, the companions, went back to Mecca. They were able to take Mecca back again. Now, the Kaaba at that time has been changed for many years. Many times has the Kaaba been changed. And the Kaaba, when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam went there, was not in the exact same form as it was when Prophet Abraham created the Kaaba. So one of the sunnah is to go back to how Prophet Ibrahim did the Kaaba, how he built the Kaaba. However, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not do that. Why did he not do that? Well, he explained in this hadith, in which the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "O Aisha, had your nation not recently left ignorance, I would have had the Kaaba pulled down and rebuilt to include the portion which has been missing." Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, because they left ignorance, because many of them were converts, they used to be mushrikeen, they used to worship many gods, and they used to do a bunch of polytheism, and they used to drink, and so on and so forth. He did not rebuild the Kaaba because it might be harsh on them. He understood. He was wise. He said, while it is technically the right thing to rebuild the Kaaba, it's not the right thing for that specific time. It needs a later time. Now that we looked at all three roles, ijtihad, protecting orthodoxy, and using one's wisdom, being wise, we can finally go into the final section and show why understanding consciousness being the fundamental difference between humans and AI, and the three rules that we discussed in this previous section, why AI can never replace Islamic scholars. Let's look at all those three rules again and show why consciousness is the key to those three roles. In terms of ijtihad, there's a famous story in which after the death of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when Omar was a Khalifa, there was a severe famine that struck the Muslim Ummah. Now, in the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if somebody steals, as everybody knows, their hand gets chopped off. However, Omar changed that. When this famine struck the Muslim Ummah, Omar said that there is no cutting of the hands. That was a new ruling from Omar bin Khattab that was never stated in the Quran and Sunnah. In the Quran and Sunnah, it's very clear. If you steal, cut off somebody's hand. However, Omar understood what was going on. Omar understood the hardship that struck the Muslim Ummah at that time. He understood that these people, they were not stealing just for fun or for whatever, but because it was such a harsh time. That famine struck. That some of them stole out of darur, out of necessity maybe. That it was a hard time for many of the Muslims. And Omar not only looked at the Islamic rulings, he not only did he look at the maqasid of the Sharia, but he also looked at the people, understood what they were feeling, understood the problems that they had. And because of that, he created a new ruling. He laid down and suspended the cutting of the hands. This is similar to when Omar did 20 rak'ah for Taraweeh, when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did 8 and then 3 for witr. Both of these are things that did not occur during the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's time. However, Omar uses ijtihad. Omar was a scholar and a Khalifa, obviously, and he uses ijtihad. And the reason why he was able to do ijtihad was because of his consciousness. He was able to understand the situation, what was going on. He was able to understand the difficulty that the people had due to the famine. He was able to understand the difficulty that arose from praying 8 rakat for many people. Many of them could not stand for such a long time. They would pray for many long hours. 20 rakah was a lot easier for many people. While there is no explicit text stating 20 rakah, or no explicit text stating that you can suspend the ruling on cutting the hands, Omar, because he was able to understand how people felt, because he was able to subjectively understand the scenario and understand people, understand emotions, but also understand the rulings of the Sharia, was able to develop these new rulings or these new changes. If it wasn't for consciousness or being able to understand other people, to being able to actually properly understand human nature and human emotions, or he would never have suspended the rule of cutting the hands. He would never have made it 20 rakah over 8 rakah. But it was because of his understanding, it was because of his consciousness and understanding human emotions, actually deeply living those human emotions, that he was able to develop those new rules through the use of ijtihad. Let's look at protecting orthodoxy. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, one of the greatest scholars of the Islamic history, was persecuted, was tortured because he refused to state that the Quran was created. At that time, almost all the scholars said that the Quran was created. But Ahmad ibn Hanbal said otherwise. He fought against those. He went through being tortured. He was persecuted. Yet, because he upheld what the Quran states and understood that this was a heresy, that this takes you out of the fold of Islam, he refused to say that the Quran was created. Now, while ChatGPT can argue against this position, AI, this is something that many people think otherwise, AI is biased. Actually, everything and everybody is biased. However, Islamic scholars are biased in the right way. They're biased in protecting the religion. AI has no preferences, whether you believe in Islam, whether you don't, whether you're an atheist or not. AI does not care. In fact, if you ask ChatGPT whether they think that God exists, or does God exist, or what do the arguments point towards, it will always tell you that, well, the question is very complicated. There's many different ways of looking at this question. It doesn't give you an answer. It stays right in the middle. making it seem like both answers are right is just based on your subjective opinion. However, Islamic scholars are biased for the right reason. If you ask them, does God exist? Of course they're going to give you arguments for God's existence. Of course they're going to give you the proper Islamic guidance. If you ask ChatGPT an Islamic fiqh question, it has no understanding or no bias to which scholar is right, which scholar is actually a good scholar to trust. It has no understanding of that. It'll take from different places. And this is where the Suleiman Ruhaili clip came into play now. My dad sent the Suleiman Ruhaili clip, and this is where the video kind of came about. And in this video, Suleiman Ruhaili makes this exact same claim, in which he gives this analogy.
وأما الأمر الثاني فأحذر طلاب العلم من الاعتماد الكلي على الذكاء الاصطناعي في جمع المادة العلمية لما يطرحونه على الناس، فإن هذا الذكاء الاصطناعي حاطب ليل يجمع الخير والشر والخطأ والصواب، فالواجب على طالب العلم إن استعمله أن يتأكد من المعلومات وأن يراجع وأن يدقق وأن يحقق.
So in this analogy, Suleiman Ruhaili is making the claim that AI is simply somebody collecting wood. They don't care whether the wood is good or bad or whatever the case may be. They are just collecting wood. That's AI. You tell that wood collector, give me wood, they're no bias. They'll just give you whatever they have. Or they'll just throw all of them at you and you decide. Yes, however, the Islamic scholar is the one that collects all the wood, but when you ask him for the right wood, when you ask him, I need wood to make fire, he'll give you the best wood. He'll give you what is needed. Islamic scholars are biased in protecting the faith. That's why Ghazali, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ahmad ibn Hanbal struggled to protect the deen. But it was because of that struggle, because of that bias, that we have the religion that we have today, and is not as corrupted as, say, the Christian religion or any other religion. AI, because it does not have that Islamic bias, can never protect orthodoxy in the same way that Muslim scholars can. And now, the last role of Islamic scholars is being wise, is using their wisdom. And a great example of this is actually found in one of the companions of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Somebody came up to one of these companions and asked this companion, can Allah forgive every sin? And the companion, shockingly to everybody, said, no, Allah cannot. And the man walked away. When other companions asked this scholar, why did you say that? Why did you say Allah cannot forgive every sin? It's clear that Allah can forgive every sin except for shirk. The scholar, Sahabi, said, because I looked at the man's face and I saw anger in his eyes. And I knew if I said the right answer at that time, he would have gone and killed somebody. He would have done something haram. He asked that question, not as a general Islamic ruling, but a get-out-of-way free card in order to kill and do this haram act and be forgiven by Allah. And then this scholar knew if he gave him the right answer, he might have gone to kill somebody. But because he gave him the wrong answer, but the right answer for that individual not kill anybody. And that's being wise. And that is wada shay fi makani sahih. He put that thing, that ruling in its proper place. He didn't give him the ruling that he wanted. He didn't give him the ruling that was the right ruling based on the Quran and Sunnah. But the scholar used wisdom, his intellect. He used his emotional intelligence to give him the answer that was needed for him, for his akhirah. What was better for his akhirah? What was better for him? How it would be better for him to go to Jannah? AI could not be able to do that, simply because AI does not have the window to reality, to look at how people feel, how people can act irrational. AI cannot do that. But that scholar, we humans, especially Islamic scholars, understand that humans can do things irrationally, can do things that they can later regret due to anger, due to emotions, due to lust. That Islamic scholar, that Sahabi, understood that. And he used his wisdom. He gave a very wise response in order to save that man, even though the Quran and Sunnah would have simply stated, if you looked at the Quran and Sunnah, or you ask ChatGPT, that Allah can forgive every sin. But that is not the right response that man needed. That is not being wise. So as you can see, AI cannot replace Islamic scholars. The main reason is due to consciousness, our window to reality. The three roles that we discussed, ijtihad, protecting orthodoxy, and being wise, using wisdom, AI cannot replicate that. AI cannot come to the same levels as Islamic scholars. The reason for that is because AI has no consciousness. AI cannot feel emotions, cannot use proper judgment, cannot use wisdom and being wise and understanding context and people's emotions the same way that Islamic scholars do. AI might have all the memorization, might have memorized all the hadith, can quote you hadith, can quote you Islamic scholars. But the Islamic scholars can do that while also viewing reality, while also understanding reality, while also using their consciousness and doing ijtihad, protecting orthodoxy and being wise. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you guys next time, and Assalamu alaikum.